called democracies. And so J. Edgar Hoover had this idea that he wanted to stop the rise of a Messiah, almost like Pharaoh during the times of Moses. And he did see Dr. King and Malcolm as the possibility of being that Messiah that would rise up among the African Americans and free them from the bondage of modern-day Pharaoh. And so that was the mythology that J. Edgar Hoover operated out. And I would think that even to this very day, there's still that paranoia that somehow the Most High will come with divine intervention and raise up another Messiah in our midst who will free us from that type of oppression. But that was the type of mythology that was operating that time period. And also the fact that just before Malcolm and Martin, you know, you had Paul Robeson and W.E.B. Du Bois who had declared themselves as communists. And they had traveled to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. So there was the possibility that they too would make those links with the communist faction outside of this country. So the Cold War played a major role in how the civil rights movement. As a matter of fact, there were people in King's movement that had to leave the movement because people thought that they were communists. Martin Luther King in the early 50s was accused of being a communist, you know. So I think that was the kind of idea that J. Edgar Hoover was operating from, this fear of communism rising up in the form of a black messiah among African Americans.
Now, what is the legacy of of Malcolm X?
Sure.
I mean, what role do you think that he continues to play in our society today?
In my judgment, I think the legacy of, as I would call him, AAl-Hadid5, because when he made the pilgrimage to Mecca, he changed his name. I think that when you look at the year 1965, this was a very powerful year. This is a year that Malcolm made the pilgrimage to Mecca. This is a year that Dr. King did the Selma Montgomery March in terms of the Voting Rights Act. But he was effective in linking the Muslim world with African-American Muslims in this country. He was also effective in linking the African continent with the struggle inside of this country. So as a spokesperson for Pan-Africanism and also a spokesperson for Muslims all over the world, I think he was very effective in making that link. And then once he made that link of American Muslims in general and African Americans in particular with the Muslim world, it was at that time that immigrant Muslims started to gain more confidence. In fact, they started forming their association like the Muslim Student Association and other organizations. And then, of course, in '65, immigration policies changed, and more people were allowed to come in this country from Muslim countries, like in the Middle East and Turkey. And so eventually the immigrant Muslims started to stand up and advocate Islam. When they first came in this country after the First World War, which was a collapse of the Ottoman Empire, they were told specifically, it's all right for you to come to this country, but don't have any conversation about Islam. Just come in here, be quiet, practice Islam among fellow immigrant Muslims, but do not try to convert African Americans to Islam. They told them specifically not to try to convert African Americans to Islam, because they knew that when African Americans came to this country from Africa, and many of them, I would say as many as 50% of them were Muslims already, who were part of the Moorish Empire as well as the Songhai Empire, and they wanted to remind these African American Muslims that before they came over here, they were Muslims. And then when they came over here, the ordeal of the plantation put them in a situation where they no longer had knowledge of their Islamic background. And so that was the reason that immigration and the State Department tried to keep immigrant Muslims away from African-American Muslims.
And so there's a long legacy of Malcolm, and even though he and Dr. King are no longer with us, that their ideas and their aspirations for African Americans continue to exist. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think after the Spike Lee's movie, there was a resurgence of an interest in Malcolm X, and that's why I'm trying to get my book together, which will loosely be entitled Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Muslim and Pan-African Statesman. And I also think that in a post-9/11 world, it would be good for all Americans to look at Malcolm's religious biography so that they too can have a better understanding of the Muslim world rather than seeing the Muslim world through the eyes of people who are making a bad name for Islam.
Or look at the book that you and Dr. Lewis Baldwin produced, Between Cross and Crescent.
Absolutely.
I think that would do the same thing.
Sure.
Okay, and of course, let me thank you, Dr. Al-Hadid, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.